the idea behind this debate is essentially there's looming over British politics a number of divisions, lots of them. Old versus young, metropolitan versus provincial, and more. And the idea is that we're going to discuss ideas, policies, and lots more that might bridge some of the divides in British politics and might bring about a new national consensus. I'm going to ask our speakers to speak for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'm going to have a panel discussion and then throw it open to the floor. So I'm going to ask Justine, if you wouldn't mind going first for a few minutes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming to this particular event. And I thought my contribution to starting off the debate would be to say that I think you can only bring our country back together if we start making sure that every single person in this country has opportunity. Because I think that is actually the glue. That's the glue that binds all of us together, opportunity. I think you have to start with the person. Britain's biggest problem is that although talent is spread evenly around our country, opportunity isn't. And yet, frankly, for all of us, it is probably the most precious commodity in anyone's life. So access to opportunity is absolutely crucial, but the reality is too many people in our country feel they don't have access to opportunity. And during the Brexit debate, when we talked about what would happen to the economy, there were many people who thought, well, I don't have anything to lose. So that isn't a relevant message for me. So equality of opportunity is absolutely crucial because it's about enabling every single one of us to be the best version of ourselves. And I think that's the best way that people can build themselves up. When they can build themselves up, they can think about building their communities up. When they can build their communities up, then we have a chance of building our country up. But I think the only way and the best way that we can bring people together in our country is for every single person here to feel like they have a stake in it and its success matters to them as well. And I'll just finish off by saying, I think as a Conservative Party, we need to do the same for opportunity that we saw happen for healthcare, and equality of healthcare in setting up the NHS, for welfare and dignity when we saw the welfare state established. We have to have the same level of ambition on opportunity now that we saw on health and welfare after the Second World War. And I believe that we should be a party that is offering an opportunity guarantee so that everyone knows what access to opportunities they will have in their lives. I've been working really hard on a thing called the Social Mobility Pledge, because you cannot deliver on that vision I've just set out without businesses being part of it. And we have a Labour Party that's saying business is a problem. They're wrong. Business is part of the solution on how we make sure that everyone in our country has opportunity. If any of you are in businesses, you're employed by them or you run them, go on socialmobilitypledge.org and look to make a commitment about what your organisation can do around partnering up with schools so that children have aspiration and mentoring and the right careers advice, around opening your doors so that young people can come in and get work placements, work experience or apprenticeships, on making sure that when you recruit new people into your organisation, it's done on a really fair basis, which isn't just good for them, but means that your organisation has access to not a talent puddle, but a talent pool. But I think it's now long overdue that we finally fix the biggest challenge facing Britain, which is equality of opportunity. I think we absolutely have to make a promise to people that they believe in, that we will not just talk about this, but deliver on it. And I think nothing less will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trevor Phillips, I could ask you to go next.
Thanks, Will, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. The theme of this is supposed to be consensus. Let me start by saying I don't myself think politics is really about consensus. If there was a clever answer to a problem that everybody knew and everybody agreed about, we wouldn't need politics. Politics is actually about choice. And that doesn't mean that the people who are on the opposite side of any particular question to you are evil or bad. It is that their experience, their aspirations are different. And we use the process of politics to try to find a way of reconciling those differences. Now, part of our problem in this country, which makes division, this idea of division, look kind of intractable, is that there's a kind of incivility in much of our politics. It doesn't help that one of our great parties, the one that I belong to, is led by anti-Stemites and racists who basically want to essentially eliminate anybody who disagrees with them. But everybody has a version of this. So part of our problem at the moment, dealing with division, is that we don't even have a process for talking about why we reach different conclusions about great questions in our society. So the first place I would like to start is that if we want to find ways to manage our divisions, we have to start finding a way of talking to each other with respect, with the understanding that people who stand on the other side of a line to us are not idiots or morons who were lied to and didn't realize and all that stuff, but that people who made a different choice to us, and that choice has to be respected. Might be wrong from my point of view, but it has to be debated. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need to identify what are the real causes of our division. In my book, there are three great questions for developed societies in the 21st century. How we live with our planet, the ecology, how we live with the machines, the advance of technology, not an issue really talked about in politics at all, and thirdly, how we live with each other. Some of you may know that I've had some views expressed about the issue of different cultures and so on, but this is an essential set of issues that we've got to deal with. Now, if we talk about the causes of divisions, and we look at what is happening in Europe and the United States, tomorrow, Sweden will see something that Social Democrats like myself and Robin, I think in our lifetime, we would have said, Sweden, give me a break. But actually, the most, basically neo-Nazis, becoming the first or second party in Sweden, 90 basically Nazis sitting in the German parliament. I think we need to think about what is happening. Well, here's part of my explanation. There was a very interesting little piece of research done about post-Brexit. They asked people who voted Remain and Leave about particular issues. One of the issues they asked was, is capitalism a force for good or evil? Interestingly, there was absolutely no difference in point of view between Leavers and Remainers. 51, 49%, in both cases. Where these two tribes differ are on questions like feminism, good or bad, 2 to 1 one way, 2 to 1 the other way, multiculturalism, 3 to 1 one way, 3 to 1 the other way. And this tells me something important. The question about our divisions has to be properly located. And my view is that we talk rather glibly about identity politics, but the question about our divisions really surrounds what kind of people we want to be. And that is why, to some extent, the Brexit question has transcended economics. It is really about what kind of people we want to be. So lastly, I just want to say a quick point about how we deal with some of this. The two questions which I think politics is not any good at dealing with at the moment are the demographic question, how we live with each other. We're not even, for example, talking about, except for David Willett and his colleagues, about the generational divide. How do we divide our resources between those who've had a lot of life and those who've not quite so much life? We keep avoiding this, which is why we can't solve the social care question. We are not really tackling the issue of integration. We talk about immigration numbers, but actually the problem that we need to face is how is the change in the composition of our population changing people's lives and their culture? And most of all, biggest question in my view is technology. We talk a lot about Brexit, but I've been president of the John Lewis Partnership for 4 years. We have 85,000 workers. What they wake up every morning thinking about is what will happen when there are no more cashiers needed, because we will do that within 2 or 3 about driverless cars. These are the issues that actually are dividing our society. And if I may end by saying, in my view, the biggest and most damaging division is not between one group of people and another. It is between the political and media and Westminster elite and the rest of the country who are having a completely different conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, if I could just turn to my left and Charlotte Black will give her thoughts.
I want to talk about prosperity and capitalism and why I think that, I'm sure, I have to take as a given that everybody in this tent is going to believe that, that accept that the need to create wealth and in order for the nation to fund the increasing demands and for us to be able to secure our homes and income when we're not earning anymore. But plainly the positive effects of capitalism have been hidden from too many people for too long now. As Lord Equell, famous of these parts, memorably said, the market is a good servant, but a bad master. And latterly the market has become supreme master over almost everything. It's always being deferred to. And I think we need to consider redressing that and how we get more involved, more people more involved in understanding that we are all capitalists. So, I think the dissatisfaction is sort of growing and building up. We've only got to think about the trains, and bosses appear to be disproportionately greedy at the expense of their customers and their staff. Competition is quite often stifled with higher and ever increasingly higher barriers to entry, with the global big beasts just investing in new technology and scaling up and grabbing ever more market share and pushing out smaller entrepreneurs. So I've long believed that there's a need that government and business need to sort of recontract with society in a way and say what they're going to do and indeed what they can't do and what they're not going to do and for how much they're going to do it for. So I think we need to find a way to more fairly align the interests and incentives of shareholders and management on the one hand and employees on the other. Nearly all of us, almost everybody, is a capitalist in our pensions, for example, and I think we should give huge high praise to auto-enrolment, which has been a great political achievement, as now the vast majority of citizens have got some stake in the game, some capital outside their house. And I think this scheme needs to be extended, I could talk about that for a long time really, to the self-employed now and potentially stay-at-home parents. We need to see an increase in the investment levels there. But the dwindling savings of our nation should really give us even greater cause for concern. But this pot of capital, however big or small it is, it's ours, and I hope that technology is soon going to enable you to keep your pension or to be able to control it keep it under your own control, rather than having endless different little pots with different employers or different providers, so that you could watch it on your phone, calculate projections, see how much you need to invest, make investment decisions, increase your contributions. Just be aware that you are a capitalist and that you do have control over that. So these advances in technology, I think, do have the potential to make stakeholder engagement much more meaningful and to work towards creating new links between companies and their staff and potentially with suppliers and customers, as well as the shareholders in ISAs and pensions. And I have this sort of dream, I'm still in my dreams, I have to say, but that we would have an app on our telephones whereby we'd be able to express our views on the companies that are underlying, that are in our pension funds, for example, and we'd be able to vote on BP's remuneration policy or a merger of Cadbury, for example. We'd be able to, at least on a one-man, one-vote basis, be able to express an opinion, and that those opinions should be published like a poll, and that the bosses will either have to comply with the wishes of its stakeholders or explain satisfactorily to our satisfaction, explain why they're not going to do that. If you own BP, you want it to do, if you own a company and you understand you own that company, you want it to do well. And I think that's, there's a mismatch out there at the moment, is that people are so cross with business. So that's really what I think, that we need to force the bosses to comply with what we're all thinking from a much broader perspective. I mean, capitalism is not a pernicious game. It's a remarkable force for the broadest possible prosperity that lifts all boats. So, but we've just got to let everyone know that and see that it's in their interest that it continues to do well and behave properly also.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And on to Sir Robin Wells, if you could speak next.
Sure. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Hard luck. And with my accent, if you can understand me, you'll be doing really well. So many apologies to those of you that can't follow the speed of Scottish thought. I got the Scots on my side there. I think the rest of you are going, what the hell is this? So, policy exchange are doing something around prosperity, people, place and patriotism, and I think if you bring those things together you begin to understand the nature of kind of what's going on. I want to start with what I think the problems are and then briefly outline I think some of the opportunities. For 100 years, 150 years capitalism, entrepreneurial capitalism has worked. Productivity has gone up, there's been more wealth. The Tory and Labour Party are split. The Tories want to generate a bit more wealth and maybe do a bit of redistribution, and Labour want to do is redistribution and maybe generate a bit more wealth. There was a reason those two parties were very close together, because basically we were taking the wealth and then putting it, capitalism won't necessarily distribute it properly. That's why you've got social democratic parties, why you've got trade unions to fight for that redistribution. And by and large, that worked. Working people believed in us. Working people thought we had an answer. Well, guess what? We don't have it anymore. Because as productivity slowed up, globalisation's come along. Globalisation is the single greatest achievement for reducing poverty across the world. Yeah? We've all got that, haven't we? We do understand that there was 1.5 million people in poverty. 1.5 billion is now at 350 in the last 25 years. We do get that. But the price has been paid in developed countries by people who are on lower incomes, by people who are working, and for people, working class people, for the last 10 years they've seen no increase in their wages and in their wealth. But they've seen other people's go up. So guess what? They think we don't care. They think this isn't very right. I don't get that. So when Brexit came up, I think there were three things that people were voting for Brexit. And I'm a Remainer, a bit reluctant, but I'm a Remainer. They voted because they thought economically it was the right thing to do. Hey, people aren't stupid. They make decisions and they said, we think this is right economically. Don't agree with them, but cool. They said, I don't like immigration. I can see people coming in. I can see wage rates going down. There's always an issue in immigration. I mean, Gillian Duffy wasn't a racist. There are racists, but there's lots of people saying, I don't get it. I'm uncomfortable. Are we listening? No, we don't necessarily listen. Then political correctness, you know, we started from a very good ideal that we should be polite to each other, becomes something that we then enforce quite rigorously. And I think in addition to that, people said, I want to take control of my country. I want control. The Brexit people say that was a big factor in them winning the ballot. Well, that's not a stupid thing for people to say. People said that's what they wanted, and they wanted essentially to break free from the elites and say, you elites don't listen to us. You don't care about our money. You don't care when we've got cultural changes. You don't care about any of those things. So I'm going to vote Brexit because maybe I'll get something better out of that. And the people who should take the responsibility, if you don't like Brexit, look at what you did beforehand politically and ask, why didn't I address those problems if I wanted to avoid Brexit? Don't blame people for it. Blame yourselves. I blame me. I'm a Remainer, as I said. So take it beyond that, and I think we're looking at then political failure and the elites failing me. And for me, it was summed up in 2015, the last time we had a good Labour leader of sorts. And basically our policy was, vote for me and I'll give you a microwave, or whatever you want. And bloody Tories, they're only going to put 5 billion in health. I'll do 10. No, the Liberals do 15. Nonsense politics when it comes to investing in our public services. First, look at how we're spending money. If productivity is falling generally, and I think managerial capitalism and an analysis of managerial capitalism is desperately what's been done, and the fact is that they are not very efficient ways to do things. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can go through in terms of why managerial structures don't necessarily encourage productivity. But in the public sector, we haven't challenged productivity. The truth is, as a former Mayor of Newham, before the Corbynites decided I shouldn't be, I don't like them, they don't like me. That's okay. We said it's really important that we try to deliver services and try and do the right. And the truth was, the first few years I said, yeah, okay, we could do it easily enough. But then we had to do some more thinking about how we drove productivity. The debate about outsourcing and nationalisation is nonsense. Big companies, Carillion, yeah, okay, let's have British Rail back. Because me and Trevor were just saying, British Rail, do you remember British Rail? Those of you who are young, you don't know what it was like in those days. Those of you who are older are going, oh my God, please no, not that. So the issue becomes, if you're looking at public side, what can we do? Well, I would argue, and I'll finish by saying what we did in Newham, because why not? We decided our philosophy was about resilience, about supporting people to build capacity, that we can't do things for people, but we can be there on their side. So we're spending $6 billion on the biggest jobs brokerage in the country, $7 million on free school meals, teach every kid to play a musical instrument for $2 million. Things to build capacity. And then we said, how do we become more efficient? And the way we did that was we challenged, we had no cuts and froze our council tax for 10 years. And we did it through a process of saying we're going to create out of our existing services, small businesses, where competition and innovation and incentives work properly. To do that, you need to look locally. You can do the same in the NHS, you can do the same in all sorts of places. We need our politicians to talk about practical matters to deliver what people need on the ground. They do not believe in us, they do not believe in the political process, they are right not to believe it. We need to rethink and say, how do we actually deliver on the ground? Because for the last 25 years we've talked about it, but we've not been very successful at it.
Thank you very much. And finally, Benjamin Barnard.
Thank you very much for having me. So, I am not nearly as qualified as everybody else on this panel, but I do, as a university student, have two quite distinct advantages when it comes to talking about building a new national consensus. And the first of this is that I have inordinate amounts of free time on my hands. And I have filled that time basically by looking and reading everything it is that Jeremy Corbyn has been saying over the last 40 years and trying to write an intellectual history of Corbynism, if you'd credit it. And the other thing I do is I have exposure to people who didn't just vote for Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't just campaign for Mr. Corbyn, but they want to do nothing but talk about how brilliant he is the entire time. And what I think is really interesting is that when you put these two things together, you realise that they don't fit next to each other that well. Jeremy Corbyn is an old school, post-colonialist person who's not really concerned about domestic policy and is concerned with foreign policy in the world. And what he's concerned about is removing the inability, the differences in power and trying to create a world order based on that. And that's how Northern Ireland fits in very neatly with a kind of pro-Palestinian agenda, and that's where lots of his thought comes from. By contrast, lots of the people who vote for Jeremy Corbyn are very, very concerned with what we've spoken about on this panel, domestic policies. How do I have a situation in which I have the capacity to own my own house as early as I can in life? If I am a woman and I'm going into the job market, how is it that I can make sure that I am not earning less than my male counterparts? It's a fundamentally aspirational movement, and that aspiration, I think, dare I say it, is quite conservative, but it's also something that we can totally unite around and build a consensus upon. And I think what we need to do is we need to capture that desire to hear an aspirational politics expressed in this country and move forward with it. Policy Exchange are doing great work on this, and they have 4 different areas that have been mentioned so far: people, place, patriotism, and prosperity. And I think that if we're going to really look at the nuts and bolts of what building a consensus is it's building a framework in which you might have the dissent that Trevor described very, very brilliantly earlier. And how do you create a framework so that the dissent that you have can articulate it as brilliantly as possible? And so to take one area in particular where I think we are most divided, that of immigration. How can we create a framework in which we can have discussions about immigration as clearly and as articulately and actually in a way that is as most consensual as possible? And I think we need to lay down some very fundamental principles. And we need to say that we like high-skilled migration. We like high-skilled migration so much that we're prepared to have unlimited high-skills migration. And in terms of low-skilled migration, though we need it, we think that there's a big political consensus somewhere in this country to have a limit on it. And what we're doing when we have a discussion about immigration is talking about two separate questions. Firstly, where do you distinguish between high-skilled migration and low-skilled migration? What differentiates those two things, and where do we want to draw that limit? And secondly, how much of a cap do we want to put on low-skilled migration? And once you've built a framework like that, through which you can have these differences of opinion, and you can basically lay down the principles that you agree on, I think you can go much further. And I would say one other thing, during the EU referendum, I did a lot of campaigning. I campaigned in Leave voting heartlands like Sunderland, and I also campaigned in bizarre places like Kensington, Chelsea, where you'd knock on the door and the chances were that they were going to vote Remain. I don't think I met a single person on the entirety of the campaign who didn't believe in that fundamental statement that we want lots of high-skilled migration and some kind of a cap on low-skilled migration. Now, they might have vastly different ideas about where they want that cap to be, but we need to have that discussion, and we need to have the capacity to control it. I think that if we're going to start thinking about building a new national consensus, that would be a very good place to start.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, I thought we might pick up on one of the questions that Trevor raised, which was essentially looking at the subject of immigration, social cohesion, quite key to it all. What kind of people do we want to be? And I think looking at one area that Policy Exchange is researching is basically the massive value divide that the Brexit vote revealed between people perhaps in metropolitan centres, in the regions, who essentially have very different answers to these questions. And I wondered whether I might ask Justine, for example, you're a London-based MP now, but you're from Rotherham. You have perhaps seen both sides of that divide, and so you may have some interesting points about how exactly we might go about bridging it.
I think people, well, obviously it's complex. I mean, there's a bit of this that is about appealing to how people feel about this topic, and giving them a clear sense that actually people do finally have a grip on this and understand what changing communities mean to families who are affected by that. And I grew up in Rotherham 30 years ago. It was actually a pretty mixed community then, but when I go back and see friends and family now, you know, it's very different again, and you have a sense of a place that is really two halves in some respects in terms of how people mix with one another. And I don't think anybody there feels that that's a good thing either. Which is why, you know, when I talk about why I think in the end it's about opportunity, I just think that is probably the best way to start bringing people together and feeling like they've all got a collective crack of the whip. But in terms of the more substantive answer to the policy question, I think you talked a little bit about it just then. I think we need to recognise that in many respects you need a skills strategy for our country, and migration should very much flow out of that. But above all, we should be looking at how we unlock the skills and the talents of people here, and making sure that we have absolutely addressed that. And then, of course, we will want to be part of a global market for talent. We will want to have an open door for those people that we think can really add to our own human capital, which is our biggest asset, and make our country successful. But yeah, we've really got to be conscious of the fact that people feel real ownership of their communities, and when they feel like they're changing beyond their control, and that isn't in anyone's interest. And I think you talked about Sweden, but actually, you know, the seeds for all of this, I think, were sown, you know, maybe 15 plus years ago, when people saw rapid change start to take place, but they couldn't discuss how that felt or what it was meaning. And I think we can learn from that, and it may be that what we see in places like Sweden is, if you like, that now playing out, given that they're now seeing the same process underway. But I think in Britain, you know, we can perhaps just at least reflect on the fact that in the end, diversity is good, and when you look at successful countries or companies, actually, they're able to use the talents of absolutely everyone. And as Trevor, you said, people with different views is not a bad thing, that's a healthy thing. It's one of the reasons why I think the UK works. I think it's for different countries with different cultures that make a better UK. So we shouldn't run away from it. I don't think we should get in a massive funk about the fact that people voted differently in Brexit. I mean, it's like any politics. They just had a different view on what good looks like. It's a healthy thing, but we need to understand where those differences arise from and then perhaps work back and see where the commonality is. And I still personally believe there's way more in common with people around this country, around what kind of future they want for Britain, what kind of future they want for their country, and there's way more that pulls us together in practice than separates us. But I think we have to stop perhaps focusing on the divisions quite so much and start moving towards some action around how we find that common ground and action around how we build more common futures.
Thank you. I thought, looking at the area of prosperity, picking up on some of those remarks, we could, thinking about the left behind people, perhaps some of the people who voted for Brexit, some of the policy solutions that have been proposed, higher minimum wages, restriction on low-skilled migration that Benjamin was discussing, we're basically talking about raising the cost of labour. And there may be some unintended consequences to that, such as higher unemployment. I wonder whether we're ready as a country to make those sorts of trade-offs, or whether we truly understand them. And I was going to put that to Trevor.
Look, can I just start maybe in take us to a slightly different place. British people are not bigots. They're not racists. I mean, I can give you a long lecture about that, but just take it from me, I know about that stuff. What they do like is honesty and openness. And because this is the only excuse I'll have to say this in public, the sort of directness and honesty that Justine displayed in her own life, in bringing her, as it were, as we say in the diversity field, bringing her whole self to work, is what British people like. They want to know who you are. They're not bothered about that by and large, but what they are bothered about is when you don't tell them who you are or what you do. Which is why, for example, politicians who are, for example, all over the newspapers today, it's not that we disapprove of what he or she might do in their own time. What we disapprove of is not telling us who you are and trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And when it comes to this issue, it's very easy and habitual for politics to fall into a conversation which is about numbers, policy, and all of that. That's necessary, but it is not the thing that drives it. In Germany, what really, aside from Mrs. Merkel's unfortunate way of dealing with the refugee crisis, what really drove hostility in Germany was the sense that immigrants were doing things that German natives of any ethnicity would not be allowed to do, and nobody would talk about it. And I'll give you a very concrete example of why that's an issue here. In London, we've had our 100th stabbing fatal, I think, this year. I will defy any of you to find a piece of newspaper reporting, anything from the BBC, anything from any politician that points out that virtually every victim and every perpetrator who's been caught is a black person. Now, the truth of the matter is, that's not all black people. I hope you don't think I'm going to be stabbing any of you today. But if we don't understand that fact, we cannot understand what is going on. And I think Robin will say from his experience, and I know certainly from my experience, that actually the ethnicity of this is extremely important. It is part of the explanation for what is going on. These are people from refugee backgrounds and so on. Now, if we can't actually say that publicly, how can we ever hope to solve the problem? And the reason I raise this point is your point, Will. When we talk about the left behind, we immediately go into what can we do to fix the left behinds mode. How can we put more money? Let me be absolutely frank, and I'm going to say this, hoping that nobody's going to report it in the wrong way. Sometimes we might want to say to some of those left behind, get out of bed in the morning. Get your children to school on time. If you need help to do that, tell us you need help, and we will put somebody in your house to help you. But the truth of the matter is, an extra tax credit, an extra 10 bob on the benefit is not going to help you. What is going to help you is a change in culture and the way that you conduct your life, the way that you bring up your family. And sometimes politics has to lead on that and say to people, this is as much on you as it is on us. Now, unless we get onto that kind of honesty, then coming back to what I said at the beginning, people outside of politics will never take what we say and do seriously, because they know we are missing the point every single day.
A quick next question that I might put to you then, Robin, and then to Charlotte very briefly, because I want to get the audience involved as well. But who should decide when the state gets involved? And is there basically a danger that the sort of intervention you're talking about is too centralised, that local people basically don't feel like they have a big enough say in the sorts of help that they might get?
I'm a great fan of delivering things kind of locally. I think you can see things much more clearly locally. I think you get under more pressure locally, so I think that there are opportunities there. Can I pick up just a couple of things that were said? I think Trevor's point is really important.
I knew I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, you should have. Yeah,
I knew I shouldn't have said that.
At least you didn't do it in Parliament, mate, so that's okay.
That's never going to happen.
Any scientists here? Put your hand up if you have a scientific background. Well, I'll talk to you because the rest of them don't understand. The scientific method is the single most powerful thing humanity's ever developed. We understand things by asking what the truth is and by asking questions. If you don't tell the truth, you'll never get the solution. I'll give an example on skills. We're rubbish at skills. When will we admit that we've been going down a path for 25 years that makes no sense? Abolishing technical colleges, driving to get more university degrees. For God's sake, why? Not everybody wants to go there or wants to do that. When do we get the truth? Interestingly, on Trevor, I'll tell you a wee story. We were doing something in Green Street to stop curb crawling, and we caught 105 men curb crawling. And the police officer said to me, it was ethnically appropriate. And I said, what do you mean? Oh, it was an ethnically appropriate stop. And I said, well, that means they were all Pakistani. He said, well, yes, they were. I understand why, but until we tell the truth, we can't answer the problem. It's no good trying to then deal with you know. Another example, 30% of women were presenting late in Newham Health, and they wanted to put leaflets out. And we said, why don't we find out what the problem is? Turned out that half of them were presenting to their GPs in time, but weren't getting to the hospital. So what's the point of giving them leaflets, because it ain't going to work? The first principle must be to tell the truth and discuss what the problems are. Then agree what we want to achieve. What do we want to achieve in terms of women? That's the debate we should be having, but you have to have it on the basis of having the facts. Now, it's different in every area. That's why, in my area, it's quite different from Kensington and Chelsea. I mean, who would want to live there rather than Newham, you know? I'm not going to ask you from Kensington and Chelsea here, because there might be more of you. So it's about understanding problems and being honest about the problems and saying, well, what is it we want to achieve? But I have to say that our political discourse is poor on that. We do not have honest answers. And I'll come back again to this. And if you don't believe me, just ask why young people have been treated so crap. I mean, really? What we're doing to young people today in the offer we've got for young people? Are we not ashamed of that? We're not ashamed of what we're doing to the next generation? When will we discuss the causes of that problem and say, what do we want to try and do? When will our policies do something in practical terms about it? Because I see precious little impact on the policies. And we haven't, as you said, Trevor, even begun to talk about what's coming towards us. Well, just dealing with what we've got would be a start, but what's coming towards us is frightening. If you're not frightened, you don't understand it, I think.
Thank you. I think we might skip straight to questions from the audience. We've got 10 minutes, and I'll probably direct the first one at Charlotte. Shall I?
Thank you very much. My name's Ashton. I just want to say, completely agree with the point Trevor made about the point about consensus. There's very few basic things we can actually all agree upon, and one of them is the right to disagree. I think consensus in some ways can be a dangerous thing, because in some way every view is somehow right in its own way. I think it's something that Robin alluded to, that there is such a thing in some instances as absolute truth. Peddlers of mistruth aren't held accountable for their actions, whether that's alt-right trolls or the Canary.
Sorry,
I'll get to the point.
I'm just aware that we have so little time left, so just a quick question.
Is the big issue that we don't have a generation of people that cannot discern or do not want to discern truth from lies?
Thank you very much.
That was, I think that's much more Trevor. Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, is this working? Do we have a generation of people who can't tell the difference? I don't believe that. I'm absolutely certain that people could tell the difference, but I think that they're actually deeply divided. And I really think that everything that's been said here is really quite important in thinking about how we're going to bring people together, and actually how do we see what's the common good between us, between our position and Jeremy Corbyn's position. Well, maybe not Jeremy Corbyn's position, but certainly a lot of his supporters. I think that's the most exciting thing that's been said, really, that Ben said, that we think that actually that they have the same sort of aspirations, and we all, I think we can all see that. How do we find a way of trying to come together and frame our policies and the way we behave in business and the way we do things in order to try to draw more people in rather than looking at the divisions?
Next question.
Hi, my name's Kate. I'm not a member of a political party, but I have been campaigning for a people's vote on the streets of Norfolk for the last few months, which, as you can imagine, means I've spoken to a lot of Leave voters. How does the panel feel about a people's vote? I see that as a golden opportunity to have a grown-up national debate about the future of our country and look at all of the issues you've raised and what better policies we can make.
Thank you very much. Benjamin, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
Well, I would say this. We've actually already had a second referendum. The second referendum was in 2016. The first one was in 1975. And I think we forget that, because a second referendum can very easily become a third referendum, and a third referendum can very quickly become a fourth referendum. And I would say this, which is that on top of that, you have another layer, which is what are the actual mechanisms by which this is going to happen? We have 200 days, if you want a people's vote, to reverse the position of the Labour Party and the position of the Conservative Party. Design a question. I'm not entirely sure what that question would be. I know that the former Secretary of State for Education has some ideas about referendums with three or more questions, three different perspectives. I don't understand how that would work. I don't understand how you could have three different perspectives. And finally, would we be rejoining the European Union in the form we had it before? Would we be rejoining on the terms that member states who are coming into it be joining? I don't think these things are very clear. And I think ultimately, the biggest difference, I'm going to agree with Barry Gardner on this, is that if you have a vote in which you tell everybody that this is your last chance to have a say on this is the final decision, and you say that entirely and throughout, and you then turn around and say, actually, that wasn't the final decision you have on this, I think you would cause serious problems. And there's only so long you can turn around to the public and say, sod off, until they turn around to you and say, sod off in return.
And I'll just very briefly ask Justine to comment on that. Would another referendum improve or bring about a national consensus?
Well, I think it's not a question of whether people will get a vote on what's happening on Brexit. It's when they get the vote. I mean, they'll either have one in a structured way through a further referendum if they get the final say, or they'll cast their views on it at the next general election. So there will be a vote on the course that's chosen for Brexit. And I think government's got a simple choice. Either it can choose the three actual routes that we have ahead of us as a country for our future, either hard Brexit, soft Brexit, or Remain, or it can just guess and hope that it gets the right one that people actually wanted, the one that maybe might be their lowest common denominator, but the one that they can buy into. At the moment, the polls would suggest that the route the government's pushing ahead on in relation to Brexit has the support of just about 14% of people. That wouldn't seem to be a viable, sustainable route forward. But what I don't think is acceptable on an irreversible question is to just say, well, sorry, that's it, done. You know, we decided we wanted to go to the train station and leave. But, you know, we walk up to the ticket office and the bloke says, where do you want to go? And you're like, not Dewsbury, don't like that. Well, where else do you want to go? I don't know, not Manchester. But the train's leaving. And actually we do need to take a decision about where we're going to go, because we can't just go nowhere. And my point is, Parliament's gridlocked because we're the not Dewsbury, not Manchester crowd, rightly or wrongly. So you're going to have to unblock it through people, and I think you either give people a final say when it counts, or a final say when it's too late. But I think a government that goes down that road will rightly get held to account when people finally do get a vote.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take two questions from the audience now. I'm very open to questions that are not about Brexit. Lady in the front row.
Mine's about the role of the economy and what makes a good society. So I was interested in the thing about the high-skilled and low-skilled immigrants. So the inference I drew from that was that high skill meant high job skills. So that seems to imply that the value of any individual is determined by what they can contribute to the economy. What about other ways that people can contribute to a good society? Do we only put a value on skills as far as they can contribute to the economy?
Excellent, thank you. And a question, if we could take one right from the back, that would be, if we can get there.
I'm actually embellishing that particular point, but there's something called...
Sorry, can we ask? There was a gentleman just behind you who I was thinking. If you just wait for the microphone to reach you. Thank you.
Thank you. On the immigration point as well, I think Trevor made... Oh, I think I'll make two quick questions, if that's all right. Two very short ones.
Quick ones, yes.
Okay, so I think Trevor made a good point on immigration. Obviously, I'm a black guy from London as well, and I think it's just ridiculous, the amount of political correctness on these issues. It's crazy, and most of my friends would actually agree and say these things on private, you know. But with immigration and integration, I think the problem is we don't actually know what we stand for as a country. We don't actually have a common sense of, you know, what we're for, what we believe in, and I think that's part of the issue. So if you can address that, that would be good. To Justine as well, I'm a Remainer as well. I get the point that about the second referendum, Parliament's gridlocked, but don't you think someone like you on the left wing of the Conservative Party, and Robin and Trevor, you've agreed a lot today, and we're seeing, you know, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, don't you think actually what might be needed is a national government, and, you know, with people, like-minded, sensible people, standing together to solve it, and then possibly a new party?
Okay, thank you very much. Quite a lot to unpack in that, so we've got about 90 seconds. So I'm going to give Trevor 30 seconds, then Sir Robin 30 seconds, and then Justine 30 seconds. Thank you.
Look, because we all sit in the same room doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to agree on things. And by the way, let's be absolutely clear. I'm a member of the Labour Party. You lot have as many nutters as we have. Yours are nicer, better dressed, and probably more civil. We are horrid at the moment. But, you know, because the idea that somehow there's a group of sensible people who, if they only sat down together, they would come up with the single best answer is exactly the fiction that I rail against. Most of politics is about a judgment. It is not about right and wrong. Otherwise you wouldn't need politics, because everybody could see what's right and wrong. Most of politics is about a judgment about what kind of people you want to be. And that's what has to be debated in public. On the immigration point, if I can make one very quick point, I think the way we deal with this is partly actually what says what kind of country we are. And I think it is true that we are to some extent more than we used to be. I don't think it is, the high-skilled immigration thing is just about the economy. It is, the Canadians have done this very well. they're one of the few countries, okay, 5 seconds. They're one of the few countries that actually likes immigration, but they have two streams. Both people who can do jobs, but also churches, civil groups and so on can sponsor somebody to come to Canada. And that's a whole different route that says something very different about Canada. And that's why, actually, it is still a non-issue in Canada.
Just quickly then on the immigration and the high skill immigration, I think we have to ask the question. People raised the question of culture with this. That's what they said. They have concerns about it. We need to address that. One of the things we did in Newham, we would fly the flags of communities with large numbers, but with the British flag. We wouldn't support single ethnic or single religious groups, and we removed translation groups. We said, look, we're part of one country. We need to build a culture, a common culture, while absolutely respecting the background you've come from, not just about enjoying that, but we need to think about what we want to do. I think high skills immigration is acceptable, but we must make sure that we're also training people here. And I think we've walked away from training because of some of the skills we were able to introduce. The issue of a new party, see, when people say to me a centre party, I don't think I don't think I'm a centrist. I'm a radical. I want to change things. I want to see that I come into politics to change things so people who are poor, who work, who try, I want to see them get a fair crack of the whip. A lot of my Conservative friends also think that too. So I would like to see us, I think we need to have a conversation first about what is it we want to achieve and where are we going. And just one comment on that is, I talked to a very senior Conservative once and we had a blazing row. I was a guy I worked with for years, never had a row, had only one row. Who had most swivel-eyed loons in their party? He said it was them, I said it was us. I win.
Oh God. I'm a Conservative because I believe in a strong economy, well-managed public finances, and opportunity. But I just feel like my party has lost that message on opportunity and aspiration, which first attracted me growing up in a place where, frankly, Jeremy Corbyn was the establishment in Rotherham. People like him, they were running the council. In fact, we've seen exactly how that's played out. I'm in the Conservative Party because I felt it did deliver for people beyond just warm words that meant nothing to me and my family. But I just feel like we need to get back on track with that. We can't be seen as a party of privilege. We've got to be seen as a party of opportunity. And for me, I don't hear enough other Conservatives talking about that and sounding passionate about it and being prepared to do what it takes to change things. And we all walk on the same streets. And I think there's too much and too many people who deep down think, well, maybe if we give other people opportunity, I might have a bit less. They're wrong. It is not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win for all of us when people have more opportunity. But it is now a national imperative that we build a country where it doesn't matter where you're growing up, you know you can have a great shot at being a success on your own terms. And it is absolutely crucial that we now have this at the centre of certainly my party's politics, and that's what I'm advocating.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to all the speakers and thanks to you, the audience. I know you've all got other talks to get to, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.